Okay, well, we've spent several modules in this session and this section talking about the different components of a barrier system. We've talked about doors, we've talked about smoke dampers and fire smoke walls and barriers and partitions. All of this is great, and in our profession, um, I'd like to say that we do a fantastic job on taking care of these things, but unfortunately, um, the Joint Commission and other accreditation organizations and state surveys have pretty much consistently told us we're not doing a very good job. And so I like to spend a little time talking about managing fire barriers. And I have a comment down there, permit required. I think for whatever reason, as facilities managers and directors, um, the building gets away from us for a lot of reasons. Again, we get very busy. We've talked about that a number of times. We have a hard time getting it in control and actually managing the building, all of the building. There's so much going on. It's a very dynamic and a living organism. And what I want to do is I want to talk about the management of it right now. And I really do think that what it's going to come down to is some form of permitting that has to be applied to essentially a very broad group of people, and I would say almost anyone that works on or in the facility, that works with any of the mechanical systems or the structure or anything at all. We got to find a place, a funneling point to catch people. Doesn't matter who they are, who are going to work in our building. And I think that too many times we abdicate that responsibility to other departments like project management and others. And we're going to talk about that here. So let's talk about managing it. I think that this is a ongoing dialogue. This is an evolving dialogue. You're going to find during this presentation, I'm going to maybe drift even a little bit into some other areas that tie into helping us manage fire barriers. But this is not something we have fixed or resolved. I think you as HFLs are going to actually start to set a new tone in the industry for this, because really up to this point, I think that we've kind of, again, given it up a little bit, although we're trying to get more control of it in recent years because it's become sort of a mantra from the accreditation organizations and from the state surveyors and from CMS that we must fix this. So let's go on. Let's talk about first the issues. So the issues are pretty straightforward. Open penetrations. That's really the core issue. We have lots of open penetrations or incorrectly sealed penetrations. While we're not getting gigged as badly on incorrectly sealed as primarily open, it's still a pretty serious issue that we have in our profession. Cable management, for example, cables that are draped on sprinklers. This has been out there for a number of years now. They're starting to enforce it a lot more in recent years. But when it comes to people running cables, they will run them just any way they can, wherever they can. And sadly, I'm going to tell you that when as a biomedical engineer, I've said this before, I run cables inappropriately because I had no idea. I just really had no idea, and probably just draped them wherever I could. I know they sat on top of ceiling tile. I know that the cables that I ran for telemetry sat on top of lights and things like that. So cable management is an issue for a lot of folks. Unauthorized hanger use, which kind of ties to cable management, but again, it's also a separate subject. Sometimes, again, we're just looking for something to hang cables to, and as we have learned in other courses, there is specific requirements for hangers, spacing, and distances, and weight, and such. And cabling, it's one of those things where one or two cables doesn't seem like much. But sometimes you can look above the ceiling and there may be tens, if not hundreds of cables that all of a sudden are hanging from the same hanger, causing undue and really unauthorized stress on hangers and on other systems. Holes that are too large, again, another issue. Sometimes contractors, they just make it so big because they want to get something through there and they want to be sure that it's big enough. And they can make holes that are just way too large, which can cause problems for putting too many cables through a hole, or again making it too hard to seal. And then another little kind of nuance is wrong cable. There are many places out there, and actually I'm hearing that it's making a comeback to reduce cost, to have plenum ceilings. In other words, these are ceilings where there's not enclosed ductwork, where the ductwork, the ceiling itself is the return. And so if you're going to run cable in ceilings like that, it has to be what's called plenum rated. In other words, it has to have a fire rating on the cable. And certainly if you have a plenum ceiling and you're putting non-fire rated cable in that ceiling, that can certainly create an issue as well in terms of regulations. So these are just a handful of issues. There are others, but these are real serious issues that we run into on a continuous basis when it comes to access and installation and not following code above ceilings. Who are the culprits? Well, it's pretty obvious. Contractors are often the culprits. They're the ones that we like to blame on a pretty consistent basis. Information systems is another one, also known as IT. IS and IT, again, they tend to kind of do their own thing sometimes for many, many years. That's changing a little bit, but it's got to change more rapidly because they certainly, most of the time don't have a clue as to all the issues that we have to deal with when it comes to barrier management. Communications, which in many places is another department. Communications, telecom, which is kind of morphing into IT. Sometimes that's directly under the umbrella of facilities and plant. And sometimes it's its very own department, but they also run many, many cables in a facility. Project management, which can run, again, independently, and who knows, sometimes they're hard to sort of reel in. Biomed, again, they can often run independently. And then in-house maintenance personnel. Truly, we are sometimes our own worst enemy when it comes to this. And so why is that? Well, let's talk about that. Well, the motivation of the why is because sometimes it's just poor training. We just don't know what we don't know. We've always done it that way is a very common issue. Time is probably one of the big issues, just getting it done quickly. It takes a lot of time to understand what we're putting through there and then, get the L rating and then make sure things are done correctly, getting the material and acquiring the right material. It's quicker just to punch the hole and push it through and move on to the next job. Dollars. It can be a little more expensive for sure. It takes more time. You need more material in order to do these things right. And it takes sometimes a lot more planning. Compliance. When I say compliance, literally, it's just people saying they're just not going to do it. Sometimes, and my experience has been supervision and management, who has been around for a while, don't see the value, the importance, or the risk. And so it's just a non-compliance issue. I should say non-compliance versus compliance, but compliance gets the message. Some people just are not compliant in following process procedures. And truly, these are discipline actions and discipline activities as long as they've been trained and educated. Some people just don't like the paperwork. In order to have a process that's going to be effective, there needs to be a little bit of a bottleneck. Something has to slow folks down enough to ask the same questions. And I don't think we're straining a gnat here because it is so pervasive. If this was something that happened once in an eon, we would be straining a gnat to be having all this conversation on this subject. But unfortunately, it's a pervasive issue in our industry. And so you really need to have some filter on the front end to catch it. And my experience has been that having that filter on the front end to catch these issues does make a big difference because of the reasons aforementioned here. And then again, another motivation is a lack of authority, really. Sometimes we feel like we just can't do much about it. The work's got to get done. The project goes on. You can't slow things down. The department that is doing it, your vice president is not their vice president. It gets political. So there can be political issues and there can be authority issues that can actually, create, this issue. And let's talk about the justification for managing this. Let's talk about what is the motivation. What can we use as the reasons? And there are plenty. Patient visitor staff safety is number one. There's no doubt that while the chances are slow, the results are real. There have been so many studies and case studies that have shown when you have failed systems that people are in more danger. Ironically, it's not the firewall and the barrier that often fails first. It's human behavior and just simply not closing doors, which obviously is one of the biggest barriers to protect against smoke and fire are the doors. But that's actually a big issue is staff training and staff response. Not closing doors. But fire barriers, again, it's there for a reason. But we are there to protect folks. The accreditation success. they're getting tougher and tougher and tougher on the number of RFIs is what the Joint Commission uses. K-tags is what used by the state and by CMS. But you get fewer and fewer and fewer allowed hits, if you will, during your surveys. And if you want to be successful, you need to have fewer and fewer hits in environmental care. And we have lots of areas where we can get hit. And unfortunately, when it comes to barrier management, it's often one of them. Pride in the profession. We just really want to say our building is a good building. The job we're doing a great job. And that's really something that we really want to work on, is to be able to say that. Reduce accreditation chaos, preparation, and stress. Again, so many times, leading up to survey, it seems like, facilities, I've said this to folks before, that when you get down the last 6 months, it's no longer about what you're trying to get done and your priorities. It's about everybody else's priorities leading up to survey. And it can be very chaotic trying to do and juggle so many things and really sweating bullets over, have you been able to inspect your walls and make sure that they're safe. Again, maintaining control of the building. And it's so important, and I think facilities does bear the burden on this one, and that is that, the building owner, which ultimately falls to the administration, but really it's going to be delegated to the manager or facilities director. We have a responsibility to control that building, and so we need to embrace the whole package and take ownership. And I mentioned here, weed out bad contractors. When you really start to follow good processes and good systems, and you start to hold people more accountable, what eventually starts to happen is, if you have some folks that really are not serving in your best interest, and they're really taking shortcuts, or they're really not being compliant, or for that matter, they're being belligerent about updating their skill sets, you're going to find them. They're going to present themselves, and you're going to be able to have very honest conversations with them, and hopefully make them good contractors, make them compliant contractors. But I'm telling you, guaranteed, you'll find some contractors you just won't work with anymore, because they're just not going to change. And I hate to say it, but I also like to say, you're also going to find employees that are going to be the same way. So there's reasons for doing this. These may not be an overwhelming justification, but these are powerful justifications that should help you to move the argument or move the conversation forward. Now, who's really the authority here? Well, at the end of the day, I put these three entities as being what's going to give you the authority to try to move this rock and keep this thing going. And the first authority is administration. I mean, if you can't get administration buy-in, almost anything you want to do is just that much harder to do. But I have found too, if you work with your committees, the safety or the environmental care committee can be a powerful committee. In some places it's not. It's kind of just a committee that just has to exist because it's required. But it can be a very powerful committee, especially if you have the right people on that committee. Obviously, having an administrator on the committee. I think we've talked before about even having the administrator chair the committee, and maybe this issue could come up through a subcommittee under life safety. But definitely they can be an advocate for you. Infection prevention. This is one of those little drifts. There is a definite common connection between what's going on above our ceilings or inside our building that affects the patients and affects infection prevention. And so I think infection prevention, they will quickly understand that there is a absolute benefit to controlling folks in the building and controlling folks going above ceilings or into spaces and from work and behavior. So they can be, again, another ally in your effort to try to maintain and move things forward. The method. Well, it's pretty straightforward. Training is a big one. I think getting staff trained and aware, getting yourself trained and aware. There are a number of resources out there now. Obviously, this program is a resource. Hilti does all kinds of in-servicing, and other vendors who supply the material will come in service for you. ASHI is doing free symposiums. If you go to conferences, or if you go to even your chapter conferences or chapter meetings, there's often a subject that's going to be on barrier management, and training is going to be made available. I would encourage you to take advantage of all those resources. There's so many. And really, the method, I think, really comes down to permitting, and that's really what we're going to talk about here for a little bit. Permitting, and we have a number of permits that we are required to um, to maintain. The hot work permits, infection prevention or permits, ICRAs, if you will, or PICRAs, hazardous material permitting, barrier management, which we've been talking about permitting, confined space permitting, electrical safety permitting. And when you look at this, you think, well, who's doing this work? Who's doing this kind of work? Well, the fact of the matter is pretty much anybody working in the building is coming into contact often and frequently with one of these issues. And so, again, this gets into a very interesting conversation about, how wide of a net do you cast, if you will. If a guy that's coming in and he's going to work in one small area, and he's going to, and it's a office area, and he's doing just a little carpet job, are you going to take him through a permit process for his work? I think the common sense part of us would say, no, of course not, we wouldn't do that. Why would we do that? But I would also maybe start to argue that maybe we should. It doesn't have to be a labor-intensive process. It can be just a quick checklist that takes just a minute or two to fill out. Are you going to be doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G? If the answer is no, sign off, move on, document it. Very quick. And it also gives an opportunity to meet the person, know who's working there, where they're going to be working, how long they're going to be working, maybe get some contact information, which we're supposed to get, introduce them to some of our codes for safety, which he should have. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of folks do work after hours, and we often do say, okay, well, you can go work in that office after hours, after 6 o'clock, everybody leaves. And literally, nobody's out there anymore. That person's out there by themselves. And what if something were to happen and that person is out there by themselves? We should know that there's someone there. We should have contact information. So while we may not take them through any extensive permitting, we would have another reason, and that is to know who's in the building and what they're doing in the building. You may even issue them a badge because they're going to be in the building after hours. So I would argue maybe the other side of this right now. I would say that it is better for us to cast a wider net for every contractor that works in our building, regardless of what they're doing, and take them through a quick checklist for permitting, which now we're going to get more into the permitting discussion. What I have here is an example of my permit that I put together several years ago, and it revised a couple of times. And it's somewhat specific to my facility. I did modify this several times because of my building. But by and large, it covers a number of things when it comes to above ceiling. Before I go any further with above ceiling, I've been talking with my peers out there, and the term above ceiling is kind of a misnomer. I think that most of the time it's applicable, but many times it's not. Because a lot of work, when you think about it, if you're doing work on walls, you might not be working above the ceiling, but yet you may penetrate a wall. When you're working on floors, again, you're not going above the ceiling, but you are going to penetrate a floor. If you're working in a mechanical space, let's say it's going to be where your boilers and your chillers are at, very likely they don't even have ceilings. All your penetrations are going to be in the space. And so there is no above ceiling. So the term above ceiling, while it makes sense to us in the industry, it doesn't make sense to the contractors. And again, this is another reason why I think we should have a bottleneck, if you will, or a filter to catch everybody coming in the building, because people are literally going to miss it just because we use the term above ceiling. And there are a number of issues. One item I didn't mention previously, and I'm not sure that I have it on this list, is something I should add. In fact, I needed to add it to this item. I thought about this about a year or so ago, and that has to do with fire protection on our infrastructure, on our beams, on our steel. So many times a contractor will come in and they will take the fire stop off of the steel structure so they can mount some kind of a hanger, or so they can mount some kind of maybe some kind of a brace, or maybe they're going to do some kind of a lift, and they're going to use some kind of a cable pulley system, and they're going to going to move something in a space, and they'll clear off of that fire stop, and they'll move or do whatever they're going to do, and then when they leave, guess what? They don't replace it, and we're getting gigged more and more for things like that. Again, in those spaces, it's typically not above the ceiling. They're in mechanical spaces. So again, above ceiling permit would again be a misnomer for something like that. So I'm going to tell you right now that when this document I'm showing you, I think it's a very good document. It's to a certain degree. It needs to, we need to advance our language. We need to move it forward somehow, some way. And again, what I'm suggesting is that we probably ought to catch everybody that works in our building and have some kind of an oversheet, like a cover sheet that covers, if you will, the 10 or 12 different permitting requirements we have, and ask them all those questions. Are you going to do any one of these 12 things? If not, sign off, press go, move forward. If so, then let's take each one of the permits that are behind these and fill them out. For example, like this one. So this one's pretty straightforward when you look at it. You've got your pretty classic, just project name and what they're doing and things like that. And then you get into a little more detail here. You got a description of the work, which is really important. You want them to describe what they're going to do, because once they describe it, then you kind of get a sense as a facility manager what they're going to get into. In fact, this could even be the box that lists the 12 different things that they might do hot work. Are you going to do hang anything? Are you going to pull any cable? You might have a list of 10 or 12 things. If they check off any of them, there may be a list or a permit behind this. But this one is specifically for above ceiling work, if you will, or cable work or things like that. Then we get into the systems or wiring to be installed or modified. And you get to all these different things: communication, data, fiber optic, nurse call, security, HVAC, electrical, cable, TV, fire alarm, and there's the list, and then other. And then how will the work be supported? Again, this taps into that support question. This makes sure you're having a conversation about don't use existing, don't hang things on top of on top of sprinkler pipes and things like that. Will any penetration be made in smoke or fire barriers? Now the question here, when you say this, the fact of the matter is you have to have a drawing at this point. You have to be looking at their route. Where are they going? And of course, if yes, indicate the UL listed fire stop method. There's that UL listed fire stop method to be used. And so you really have, and then you have a description here describing the method. So this is a nice opening for someone to get just to raise their awareness about what they're about to do. Now we're going to go to the next page. We can continue to talk about penetrations. On the previous page, talk about penetrations at the very bottom there. You might have seen it. But it talks about what kind of penetrations are you going to use? Are you going to go through with just you're going to use a metal pipe or conduit, cable trays, insulated metal pipe, mechanical busway, fire rated sleeve, or other. And then it asks a very important question: have you received fire stop training? Yes or no? And if they have, you should have some kind of document on file from them if they have. If not, then you're going to have to do some training, or you're going to have to make a decision whether you're going to allow them to even do the work and do the stop themselves. And then you have to document that if you do train them. If no, it says do not proceed, contractor, facility operations, or designee. Now this one here was very specific to my facility. Is asbestos located in the scope of the work? Again, you're looking at drawings. If no, proceed with permit of work. If yes, again, we have to do some stuff related to hazardous material training. And then the following items must be attached to the permit. Again, they have to provide the UL systems proposed to the job, and then facility operations has to provide the abstract of floor plan referencing location of affected area. So you make sure it's a dialogue between you and the contractor. And one thing I have here too is pre-existing conditions. If the contractor goes up in the area and they find a pre-existing condition, they need to report it to you, because if they don't, then I would always tell my contractors, I may very well hold you responsible if I go back up there and find it after you leave, and hold you responsible financially as well as otherwise. So pre-existing conditions, you want to encourage them to not just be zeroing where they're at, that they're also hopefully helping you be eyes for your facility while they're up there. And I had contractors do that. In fact, they're really happy to do that. They're happy to say, hey, look, I did my my penetration and I sealed it and I did my work, and I just want to let you know what I found. They like to point out our flaws, or flaws that are existing and that are not theirs. And this is very important, but this is the thing I had the hardest time with. It was so difficult for me. And that is, I was not always around, and in fact, I didn't feel that I was the one that was meant to do this. I really wanted my managers, supervisors, and leads to do this kind of work, because they needed to be engaged in the process. But I wanted, we needed to have the contractor signature, and then we needed someone to authorize to proceed the work on the front end. that you go through this process. And then, in order for payment to occur, there needed to be an authorization afterwards. Okay? And that really was, this process right here, getting this to happen on a consistent basis was really a challenge with my facilities. They really literally, for all the reasons we mentioned earlier, did not feel that this was a valued system. And so it was a struggle to get this done consistently. I can tell you that I filled these out a number of times for the contractor, and it was very beneficial most of the time to have done it. But I can also tell you that I had a number of situations where I saw contractors in the hallway without the permit. And of course, they should have this permit with them. In fact, we started to we really had them post it on their ladder or where they were at when they were working in our facility. So, this is a process that today will still have a lot of value, but candidly, it needs to be updated from here. And my goal with this presentation is for it to give you just a real good fundamental understanding of how you can try to push through and create the management of this. So really, it's a non-issue. We really want to make this a non-issue. If we're doing proper permitting, we should never have to go through any kind of chaos or ramp up leading into a survey. So this is really, I guess what I was saying a moment ago was kind of the summary. We don't want to ramp up. We want nice, consistent processes. A lot of folks are becoming what's called DNV surveyed and not just Joint Commission. Then there's a couple others. But the DNV chases what's called ISO 9000 training or certification, and they really focus about your processes and your systems and consistency and training and things like that and integration. And I'm not saying the Joint Commission doesn't do that. They do, but unfortunately, a lot of people tend to study for the test when it comes to the Joint Commission. And so if they're looking at something, they're paying attention to it. If they're not looking at something, we're typically not paying attention to it. It's unfortunate, but it's true. But that's also part of the challenges of working in an extremely heavily regulated environment. There's so many things to pay attention to. But in my mind, if you put in a good solid system and process and other people are trained to it, then you can kind of move on to something else. And I think this is one of those that should be done that way. In my opinion, not a soul should work in our buildings without permitting, without being monitored, or without being orientated to the space and going through a process. Because it's like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And candidly, that's exactly what this is. At the end of the day, if you do this right, it may seem counterintuitive, but the little bit of extra paperwork on the front end will save you lots of effort on the back end. And it will eventually start saving you time. Again, it seems counterintuitive, but in my opinion, in my experience, that is absolutely the case. And then what happens too is that when people know you're paying attention and they know that you're maintaining your facility at a high level, they actually will actually go further than you go. They'll take it to the next level. And that's what I have seen, is that people will amaze you at that. Once they see that this is the way it's meant to be done, they actually take it to another level, which is just exactly what you want to happen wherever you work and wherever you manage. So I hope this has helped you. Again, this is going to kind of encapsulate these lectures on barrier management. There's so much more, but those experiences and that education will be something you'll learn at seminars and at conferences and by working in the industry. But this should give you just a really good foundation to move forward and to really take it again to the next level and truly be different day one.